Hello and welcome to IndieLoupe. Okay, so perhaps a little clickbaity with the title there, but look, it is a genuine belief of mine that everyone should play this game. And if you'll give me a couple of minutes of your time, followed by another 30-ish if you're that way inclined, I'll explain why. For regular viewers, this isn't a review per se. I'm not necessarily going to dissect the game or give it a rating, other than that sweeping blanket statement that you've already been given, that, in case you've already forgotten, everyone should play it. So, first things first, why should you take my word for it? Well, the good news is you don't have to, because every single one of the first 199 people who left a Steam review agreed. Not that Steam reviews are the be-all and end-all, even the best games have their dissenters, but I was keeping track as the number of reviews kept creeping up, while Many Nights a Whisper maintained its 100% positive rating. That is, until on, as far as I can tell, what was literally its 200th review, when bloody Seth had to come along and tarnish my point by rambling about how the game caters to very specific subcultural groups, complete with some patronising closing statements for the developer about evolving and maturing. Suffice to say, Seth is not in my good books. Not because they disagree with me, nor because, reading between the lines, their thinly veiled statements likely reveal them to be, something of a bigot, but because they ruined my introductory statistic about how it's got 200 reviews and they're all positive, and how impressive that is. I don't think it's got 200 reviews and they're all positive except for Seth's, has quite the same ring to it. Either way, we've very lightly established that public opinion so far is pretty good. That can obviously be swayed somewhat depending on who's actually playing the game. If it's only big fans of the developer, Deconstructeam, and their previous games, perhaps there's an argument that the reviews are just from the choir that have already been preached to. That actually seems to be tangential to what our friend Seth was talking about, and I promise that's the penultimate time I'll mention them. I will get on to Deconstructeam's background in just a second, but there's a couple of smaller arguments for why you might not play a game, sort of any game, not just this one, that I'd like to get out of the way first. We'll start with time. Let's be honest, if you saw the length of this video and clicked on it anyway, despite it clearly stating that it's about a game that's only ever so slightly longer. I took an hour, but from what I can tell, there's people who've completed it in around 30 minutes. We both know that you've got that time spare somewhere. I suppose what's more likely is that you think it can't be worthwhile if it's so short, and there is an actual point to be made there, that games do typically take up much more of your time than what Many Nights a Whisper is asking for. If we take the last 5 games this channel reviewed as an example, according to Steam I've spent 7 hours on the horror at Highrook, 10 on the Darkest Files, 15 on Skin Deep, 25 so far on Into the Restless Ruins, and in Blueprints I've spent... Do you know what? I think you got the idea from the first 4. But I have as much, if not according to the length of this video significantly more, to say about Many Nights a Whisper. There's been 2 other games so far this year that really left me thinking. The Darkest Files for obvious thematic reasons, and another one which sent me careening into a several hundred hour project that I'm not sure I'll ever actually shape into something worthwhile. Given how long it's taken to put this video together, it's more than a little daunting to consider working on that one. Either way, both those other games took a little over 10 hours to complete. I think that second one does edge Many Nights a Whisper in terms of personal impact, but for such a short game to even be in the discussion is impressive. There's also the fact that things cost money. Maybe you want the sort of value offered by games that cost a bit more but can be played for hundreds and hundreds of hours, and there's something of a precedent for similarly short games to be relatively pricey for what they are, particularly if there's artistic merit involved, and even when there's, not. 1 hour games for a $5 or 2 hour games for a $10 isn't uncommon, and most games aren't free. But at €3 or dollars or £2.50, Many Nights a Whisper is about as close as you're likely to find. Still, not everyone has all that much money to spare. You don't need to tell that to someone who's got 2 kids to feed and is, simultaneously, trying to turn writing about niche computer games into a career in the same year that AI slop completely takes over the internet. The good news is that it's not life advice I'm giving you, but, you know, a game recommendation, so I think I can still be somewhat trusted. And yeah, in my expert analysis, it's definitely worth that $3. That's the initial brief, but I suppose those arguments can work for any highly rated, short, inexpensive game. So I'd implore you to stick around, make yourself comfortable, and we'll dive into why I'm arguing for this one in particular. Naturally, we'll begin with, once again, not the actual game, but this time its developer, Deconstructeam. It's worth noting that Many Nights a Whisper is a collaborative effort between them and another developer, Selkie Harbour. But for the sake of brevity, and as Deconstructeam are more established, I'm going to focus on them here. Just bear in mind that for future mentions, particularly with regards to Many Nights a Whisper, there's another studio involved. Credit where credit's due and all that. In terms of personal experience, I'd only previously played Deconstructeam's 2014 debut Gods Will Be Watching, and despite my better efforts, didn't manage to progress past the opening scenes, so I can't exactly say I had the best of times with their back catalogue. In preparation of this video, I attempted it again, to much the same results. Still, it's a decade-old game, and they've had bigger releases since. You've got to do your research, so I familiarised myself with both 2018's The Red Strings Club and 2023's The Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood. I think it's safe to say that, without making any assessments about their quality, neither is particularly for me. It could be how sexually explicit the Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood is, or how just flat out strange the Red Strings Club is, or perhaps simply that neither game's world is particularly appealing to me. I've been able to overcome that many times before, but for whatever reason, just couldn't ever get behind either game. There are important themes in both, but there are also games out there which I think address them in a far more agreeable way for my tastes. Whether their dialogue is at times overly crude and lacking maturity, or if I'm just too prudish, is up for debate, particularly when it comes to the Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood. Some of that game's, for want of a better word, horniness does on a couple of occasions leak into Many Nights a Whisper, which is something we'll touch on a little later in this video. So if touching leaky horniness is your thing, well, play Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood, but first watch the rest of this video. None of that is to say that they aren't good games, or that anyone listening should write them off. Deconstructeam probably wouldn't thank me for telling you to play their €3 offering and ignore the rest of their catalogue. And I try not to make a habit of critiquing games that, for reasons of theme, or more typically genre, are not going to be for me. I'm not really in a place to say if they're good or bad, in the same way I couldn't assess the quality of a horror game. I just know that personally I'm not likely to enjoy them, because they're not for everyone. But Many Nights a Whisper just might be. Or even if it's not, I suppose my argument is that everyone should still play it. It's not just a game for Deconstructeam's fans, cause I can't really count myself as one of them, even if I do have an honest appreciation for what the studio is trying to do with its other titles. Many Nights a Whisper opens with an explanation for you, the player, or as you are in the game, the dreamer. 10 years ago, you were chosen to perform a ritual. You were filled with joy when, among so many teenagers, you emerged as, apparently, the ideal candidate. Since then, you've been dedicating yourself to your training in body and mind. The ritual requires you to throw a fireball with a slingshot to light up a sacred chalice. If you land it, everyone's wishes will come true. If you fail, no one's wishes will ever happen. That's the long and short of it, though the everyone there is doing some heavy lifting and is a little misleading. It's not literally every person on the face of the earth, as you might assume from the game's opening, but rather a handful of beseechers from the local village. Those wishes have to be collected by you during a confession. What's more, you can choose whether to accept them or not. At night they come to you with their wish and slip their braid through a slit in the wall in a rather off-putting ritual. If you deem the wish worthy, you cut the braid off and the wish is accepted. As is touched on at one point in the game, it does mean that bald bastards like myself are completely out of luck, lest we grow some sort of, I don't know what it's called, like a Shakespeare or Bill Bailey sort of deal.
His hair hangs down his back like a shower curtain, and his head there was a large egg.
I might be getting distracted. The point is, regardless of whether it's a whole load of wishes or just those that have been asked of you, it's still a lot of responsibility, particularly given what some of those people are asking of you. While some of them ask for things that will only affect themselves or those directly related to them, others want things with much wider reaching impact. And as a reminder, make the shot and it will all come true. Miss and it's cursed to never happen. Those who came to you would have had more luck if they'd not bothered and just tried to step out into the world and accomplish whatever they're asking for by themselves, as seemingly impossible as some of their requests might be. That's half the gameplay, hearing people's wishes each night and deciding if they're worthy or not. Arguably it's the important half, and the reason I'm suggesting that everyone should be giving this game a go, to think through the moral quandaries presented and decide what they think is correct, but the other part's not to be ignored. During the day, the dreamer has the opportunity to practice her trade, shooting fireballs. Forgive me for my sins, but one of my first thoughts was to wonder where the crosshair was, to the extent that I fiddled around in the options for a while looking for a way to turn it on. You'll have no such luck finding it though, you have to rely on other methods to make sure your shots are on target. Which, I mean, makes sense. There's not much jeopardy involved in that final shot if it's just a case of pointing the little dot at the chalice and solving everyone's problems with the click of a button. Something you'll also immediately notice is how weak your slingshot is, and presumably how impossibly far away that chalice is. That's where the last piece of the puzzle comes into play. I did say that ritual was a little unsettling, but there's a final, equally off-putting step to it. Your mentor taking the hair collected each night and braiding it into the drawstring of your slingshot in order to give it more power. Perhaps a little far-fetched, but do bear in mind that you're playing a game where you can make literally any words uttered to you come true. So I think you can suspend your disbelief that one step further. There's a kind of major point that I'll get onto a little later about that final mechanic, but that's effectively the way the game plays out. You practice shooting your slingshot, you accept wishes by cutting people's hair each night, that hair goes into improving your slingshot, and then you practice it again the next day with that power increase. Rinse, and I really hope the villagers did, and repeat. Okay, it's pretty bad for the optics of this video, not that anyone should care about that other than me and those two kids I'm trying to feed, but it's here that I'll offer you the first of two exit ramps as we push into the domain of the minor spoiler. I'd argue that none of the ones I'm about to give you should really ruin your experience, and there'll be another disclaimer before we get into the larger spoilers, but what comes next should give you a little flavour of what the game has to offer, and hopefully go some way towards explaining what the whole point of this video actually is. Remember when I said that some of those wishes are a bit more wide-reaching than others? You've got plenty of self-serving scoundrels, but there are some who want to, and this isn't hyperbole, change the fabric of reality. Maybe that's to their own benefit, maybe it isn't, but it'll definitely have a lasting impact on wider society. Things in game seem to mirror our own world. The world of Many Nights a Whisper is effectively the same as ours, magical wish granter notwithstanding. But there's a short scene where your mentor mentions that, supposedly, nobody would even notice any major change granted by a wish. The sky could have been red 10 years ago, but if someone had wished it blue, it would be as though it always had been. Assuming you make the shot, everyone isn't going to wake up the morning after shocked to hear the news that, for example, smoking is now healthy. For them, it always was. There's more to say about that, and I will once we go full spoilers, but for now I'll get on to one of the two major points that I'd like to make. Apologies if it took a while, minor spoilers coming up. I did say I'd give you one final mention of our good friend Seth. I'm assuming one of those wider reaching wishes is where their qualms about Many Nights a Whisper came into play. For all I know, their actual issue is with bald people having beautifully shaped heads, or Big Tobacco clearly twisting Deconstructeam's arm into putting pro-smoking messaging into their game. But, more likely, I suspect it's from a particular townsfolk whose wish is to make gender irrelevant, for nobody to care about it, or even, I suppose, recognise it at all. In the context, it seems a pretty dumb thing to get worked up over. I'm not going to be as obtuse as to claim that Deconstructeam aren't probably sympathetic to the trans movement, but in this game you're literally an all-powerful being who can choose to reject anything that comes your way. If you personally, for any reason at all, think it's an unworthy cause, you have the power to refuse it outright. Half the point of the game is that you're not on rails, that you're the person making the decisions. A trans person isn't going to jump from the shadows and cut the hair for you. Your mentor isn't going to berate you the following morning for daring to go against the woke agenda. The townsfolk requesting it does plead their case and try to convince you that it's something that should be done, so perhaps anyone who has a problem with this particular cause would take issue with their explanation, but everyone who comes to you tries to convince you. It would be weird if they didn't. In the interest of revealing as few wishes as possible, I won't go into details, but there's at least one person who'll come to you who's an irrefutably immoral person. Just because it's in the game, it doesn't mean the developers are advocating for it. Again, while I have no connection to anyone at Deconstructeam, or as a reminder of their involvement, Selkie Harbour, I'd be extremely surprised to learn that any of them weren't staunch supporters of trans rights, but the game itself is anything but forceful with its messaging. If it was, it would, in my opinion, detract from the whole reason I'm saying everyone should play it. It doesn't pretend to have a right or wrong answer. On that, I played the game a couple of times, something I'd not recommend and which I wasn't particularly keen to do, but was necessary in order to make this video. I say that not because it's not interesting to play twice, but because it felt like I was going against my truth. That what had happened in the first playthrough was the story for my dreamer. Hit or miss, that's the way it went. But by virtue of having effectively a second attempt and experimenting with accepting or rejecting wishes where I hadn't previously, I learned that the mentor will, rarely and lightly, question you after certain decisions you might make. Non-judgmentally, though in a way that, ever so slightly, implies you might have done something wrong, or at least you might not have considered something fully. Accepting or denying that non-binary person's wishes is not one of those moments. And ultimately, even if you're completely sympathetic to the cause, there's still reasons you'd reject it. Yes, you might be helping those that struggle with their gender identity, but at the same time you'd be removing it for everyone else, against the will of, undeniably, quite a lot of people. Perhaps it would be to their benefit, perhaps it would be worth it. Those are questions for you to ask yourself if and when you're the dreamer. But if you're the sort of person who's upset by the mere suggestion of a trans person, maybe give this game a miss. Or maybe don't. Maybe you're exactly the sort of person who shouldn't. Because that's what I mean when I say that everyone should give Many Nights a Whisper that hour of their time. I'm using that particular wish as, whether it ought to be or not, a somewhat incendiary example, I know that. But I can't imagine that there's anyone who could go through all the wishes in this game and know, with unwavering certainty, that they fall on one side or the other for every single one. There's a good chance you'll be forced to question yourself, or at the very least that you'll learn something about yourself that you perhaps weren't aware of. There's going to be more than one wish where you're really not sure what to do. Again, I'd really rather limit the examples so you can experience as many of them for yourself, and I don't want to give the impression that they're all groundbreaking. There's just as many comical wishes as there are thought-provoking ones. But, as was the case for me, perhaps there's an issue you knew you had feelings about, a different one to the current focus for what it's worth, but didn't realise quite how strongly until presented with something that addresses it head on. Perhaps there's things you don't think about at all, which you'll end up pondering and considering in a way you'd not have if you'd never played it. Look, I'm not claiming that it has the power to dramatically alter the way someone feels. To continue once again with the one example I have given you, put Many Nights a Whisper in front of everyone with deep-set gender-critical beliefs, and I doubt any of them are going to change their minds. But maybe those who don't have strong views either way might, at least, have something to think about. And that's just one example. For such a short game, there is a hell of a lot packed into it for players to consider. I'll try and lighten the tone a little bit, before we dive back into the more meaningful stuff. Another thing I promised I'd address was the really quite random bursts of horniness that have infiltrated Many Nights a Whisper, so we'll get onto that little side quest now. This section's going to be, by IndieLoupe standards, pretty blue, so there's a bookmark for you to skip to the next section if you'd rather not hear about the dreamer masturbating. You have been warned. There's a few wishes that I'll leave for you to discover for yourself that have interesting overtones, and I'll instead focus on the dreamer herself. Before each night, you get these little text-only snippets about how she spends that evening, what she does between finishing her day's exercise and attending to the villagers at the confession wall. Playing guitar, doodling, meditating, or, as mentioned, masturbating. And okay, sure, I kind of get it. There's the argument that it humanises her and makes her relatable, at least to you filthy bastard. But I'm not really sure it's adding anything. As mentioned when I was covering the Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood, perhaps I'm just a prude, but we're with the dreamer for a week, and at no point are we told how she drops a massive turd. By that I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of fictional characters who masturbate on the regular, but unless it's, for a significant want of a classier term, a wank of note, I don't understand why it would be mentioned as part of the story, in the same way we aren't expecting to be told what happens each time someone heads to the bathroom. This isn't the dreamer's sexual awakening, just your run-of-the-mill bout of, personal time. It highlights what, to me, is a strange quirk of Deconstructeam's writing, what seems to be an inherent need to shoehorn some sort of sexual content in to prove, I think, that it's mature. If anything, the way it's broached convinces me of the opposite. Admittedly, it only really happens on one other occasion, but both times it took me out of the game completely, and for me personally, detracted from the experience. As with Cosmic Wheel, it's incredibly direct. There's no real build-up either time it happens in the game, and it just gets blurted out as matter-of-factly as what the dreamer eats. A pepperoni pizza that night, in case that's relevant. I know the brief here is that everyone should be playing the game, and I may have lost track of it for a minute there. It's definitely something I'd recommend the game in spite of, rather than because of. I I can only apologise if I've spoiled a bit of quasi-voyeurism there that you'd have enjoyed being ambushed by, but I did promise I'd mention it. So with that box ticked, and that is not a euphemism, we'll move on. Hopefully at this point you should have a relatively good idea on whether or not you're going to heed my advice and play the game. And if you are, here's the final place I'll tell you to leave before we go full spoilers. Of course, I'd politely ask you to come back once you've done so, not least because I think the most important stuff in this video comes after this little section, but given that I'm effectively dismissing you, I hope you'll indulge just a minute of IndieLoupe Housekeeping beforehand. We received quite a nice email the other day asking about setting up a Patreon. If you're the person who sent it and you're listening, I think I replied to you about, it says in the script 2 weeks ago, but this video took longer than I thought, so I replied to you a while ago is the point. To quote what I said to them, my current thinking is that it seems a little premature at the moment, and that the only thing more embarrassing than having a Patreon with no subscribers might be having one with 1 subscriber. I suspect at the moment that could very well be the case. I'd also like to be able to offer at least something extra in the instance that we set one up, and I haven't really thought about what that might be. For posterity though, in case this channel, or dare I say video, fingers crossed, happens to take off, any Patreon or support link will be here. Somewhere. For now, the best thing you can do if you'd like to help us out in this little corner of the indie sphere is the usual. Like and subscribe and comment and watch our other videos that might be of interest. I'd like to make more videos like this one, but it was a perhaps surprisingly large amount of work. That might be evidenced from the time between this and our last upload. So knowing if people actually want more things like this in the future is very helpful. Housekeeping over, let's continue. So hopefully you've either played the game, have little intention of doing so, or simply don't care about spoilers. Or you fell asleep, which is also totally fine and registers as better engagement than all those flakes who left a few moments ago and never came back. I want to give you another wish example, and this one is probably the one that impacted me most personally. This one person comes to you with a wish that I thought was kinda unique to me, or at least something I didn't expect anyone would have really thought about. No, not the balding guy who wants not a full head of hair, but a skull so beautiful that artists feel awestruck and have the urge to paint immediately. That would be a massive waste, cause I'm basically there already. No, instead I'm talking about the person who effectively wants a do-over. To go back to the first day of school with their accrued knowledge and give things another try. Not so that they can look up lottery numbers, but just so that they can start over now that, in their words, they have a clear picture of what life is about. There was a stretch a while ago now, and in retrospect when I was probably far too young to be thinking about it, where that was exactly what I wished I could do. I don't know if there's some cultural reference that I had buried in my subconscious which I was drawing from, that Deconstructeam have now also drawn from, but that's pretty much verbatim what I dreamt I could do for a good year or two. I don't think I was depressed or anything like that, and I wouldn't want to trivialise actual significant mental health issues. More so, I was just regretful of past decisions, and I guess, to some degree, dissatisfied with how key choices had, I felt, closed a lot of doors for me. I'm sure there's a video essay in there somewhere about how that sort of feeling, which I guess is more universal than I gave it credit for, can be utilised in games where choices actually truly matter, which are arguably few and far between, and which it feels like Many Nights a Whisper sort of is. That's despite choices not really impacting how anything plays out in-game. Your little roundup at the end of the night will read a bit differently, but that's pretty much it in terms of what actually happens differently on screen. When I think of games where choices matter, and again, actually matter, it typically means those where the narrative varies massively depending on the options the player picks. And I would say it does in Many Nights a Whisper. You just don't see it happen. But if you've allowed yourself to invest in the story, you know what impact making that shot or not has on this game's world. To go back to that wish, the fact is I've come to terms with life a lot more since I could relate to it. I would absolutely not take that opportunity now. The whole having kids thing sort of dissuades any notion of wanting to mess around with your own timeline. But what's the right thing to do with this townsfolk in Many Nights a Whisper? Perhaps to the game's detriment, we don't really know much about the people who come to us unless they explicitly tell us. They want a fresh start, but we can't hear their voices and discern if they're, for example, and importantly in this case, young or old. Is this someone who hit their 60s or 70s and didn't live the life they wanted? Or is it someone in their early 20s, stepping out from the safety of their youth and being hit with the real world for the first time? Someone thinking that if they'd studied something different, or just studied harder, or worked on that relationship a little bit more, or made different friends, that their life would somehow be better. Someone who's barely started walking down whatever path it is they're on, with little to no idea of where they'll end up, and who, perhaps in a year, or 2, or 10, would never dream of asking to go back. And you, the dreamer, have to decide whether to accept that wish or not. And that's the sort of thing Many Nights a Whisper is asking its players to deal with, by my count, 26 times over. I'm not pretending that all the wishes are profound. You do need to take the occasional breather with a kid who wants a magical pink cat, but there can even be some hesitancy there. Perhaps the fact it goes against their parents' wishes is enough to dissuade you. Perhaps it feels like a flippant use of the dreamer's incredible gift, and you think it should only be used for things that are more meaningful. Perhaps you just don't want to accept wishes that are purely self-serving. And, as I discovered, that too can cause problems. There's a conversation I mentioned a while ago where your mentor explains that wishes which cause a massive global change also, for all intents and purposes, make it as though they'd always been true. The example given being that the sky might have been red a decade ago, and nobody would have a clue. Someone's favourite colour might have been blue, they might have wanted to wake up to it every morning, and the dreamer of the time might have thought that changing it was a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Once they made their shot, the sky would have changed and nobody was any the wiser. I don't want to dig too far into it, partially for the fear of raising too many questions. If you agree to rid the world of religion, for example, what happens to every holy site, or more to the point, holy person on the planet? But it does have some pretty significant implications on a few of the wishes you've either accepted or denied prior to that revelation. Perhaps knowing that would have encouraged you to hold back a little less, or more, in some situations. And this ties into another more subtle dilemma that can play out, and which did on my first, or let's call it my real, playthrough. I wasn't accepting enough wishes. Early on, I had set myself what ended up being too strict an acceptance policy. The first time someone came to me with a purely selfish wish, my bald friend as it happens, I refused it on those grounds. That rather set a precedent for many of the wishes going forwards. Anything that would benefit only them and nobody else was, at least for the first few days, refused. After a night where I accepted a grand total of 0 wishes, my mentor did, in their most gentle of ways, tell me that I should probably, not do that. Remember how the strength of your slingshot directly corresponds to how many wishes you accept. Get too far into the game without accepting enough, and you'll realise that perhaps you've been a little too strict with what you do and don't allow. That if you go through the game rejecting everything purely selfish, everything that affects someone's free will, everything shallow or superficial, you might find that you've not accepted many things at all. Without starting to be a little more lenient with your policy, the wishes that you did accept will be doomed to fail. You simply won't be able to reach the chalice. So eventually I did start accepting some that, in all honesty, I'd rather not have. Even with that knowledge, even knowing that without taking more and more wishes there wouldn't be a chance, there were still those I didn't accept, still those I couldn't bring myself to see as worthy. By the time I was practicing the morning of the ceremony, it was pretty clear that I wasn't going to be able to make the shot. There were a trio of practice chalices closer to me than the one I'd need to hit, and even those were unreachable. Such was the weakness of my slingshot. So that was it. My mentor had dropped a couple of hints across my time with them, indicating that perhaps it wasn't the worst thing in the world, all while describing it as a calamity, and by the time the ceremony had arrived, I'd already come to terms with the impossibility of landing the shot. There was at least no pressure there. What was there was acceptance. Knowing that my dreamer might have made the 10 years between now and the next ceremony a hell of a lot harder on everyone than they would be otherwise. Calamity. Calamity, but acceptance. Accepting, I suppose, that there isn't a reset button, that there's no way to go back to the first day of school and try it all over again. Accepting that when things go wrong, the only way is forward. I know that I've said I'm not counting my second playthrough for much, but that time there was a very real chance that I could make the shot. I'd practiced it plenty during the day, knew exactly how strong the slingshot was, knew exactly where I wanted to aim and exactly where to stand. I could run away from that spot, come back to it, point my arm to the sky and land it without fail. I did so 3, 4, 5 times. And then the ceremony came, and the sky was dark and the torches lit. And the environment was different, and my plans weren't quite as reliable. Unlike on my first playthrough, you might find yourself knowing that it's possible, and you still might find yourself having to accept that you didn't make it. Or perhaps you have to accept that you did make it, and that you're now responsible for all those wishes coming true, for better or worse. But either way, your job will be done. So you breathe in, lean back, and you take your shot.